As we've discussed, urban air mobility refers to the transportation of people and goods through low-altitude airspace. While urban air mobility is the popular term being used by the industry, as we mentioned, the word urban can be quite misleading, as the state of Ohio plans to connect its urban centers to suburbs and to rural communities through regional air corridor models. This panel will discuss the use cases for passenger air taxi, last mile delivery, long haul cargo, and medical supply delivery, and outline the value proposition, emerging business cases, and the major challenges surrounding air mobility. So this time it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Brian Garrett-Glaser. And Brian is a reporter with Avionics International and is the author of The Skyport, which is a newsletter focused on technical, economic, and regulatory issues associated with the emerging urban air mobility market. Make sure your mics are on.
Can you hear me? Nope. How about now? Nope? Yes?
Yes.
Is it working? Okay. Well, thank you, George. Thank you very much for that introduction and for this fantastic event. None of you are here to listen to me, and we have a fantastic panel, but I'll just very briefly echo two things that were said earlier. As you said in your speech, the industry does need a lot more engagement with communities and with elements of industry outside of aerospace. And so events like this are a fantastic avenue to do that. So thank you again for organizing this. And as you said as well, the term urban air mobility is, I think, pretty problematic. We're kind of stuck with it at this point, but it doesn't really properly encompass what we're going to talk about today. So, but we have 5 excellent panelists to talk further about that. So I'll begin by briefly introducing everybody, and then we'll go from there. And I think most of you have videos to share as well, so we'll learn a lot about what your companies are up to. So right next to me, Kofi Asante, Head of Strategy and Business Development at Elroy Air. Alice Cummings, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of VrtyX. And we've got Jonathan Hartman, Disruptive Technologies Lead with Sikorsky. And Edgar Valdez, Regulatory Strategy and HR Lead with UPS Flight Forward. And last, Fred Judson, Director of the Ohio Department of Transportation's Drive Ohio UAS Center. So starting with Kofi Asante, a little bit more in depth. So you're the head of strategy and business development for Elroy Air. Prior to joining, you were part of Uber's Advanced Technology Strategy Group. You helped launch Uber Freight and built an entity within Uber called Powerloop, which maximizes utilization for truck drivers by enabling drivers to seamlessly loop to their next load using a shared pool of preloaded trailers. That has a lot to do with maximizing utilization rates, which we'll talk a lot about with urban air mobility. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Elroy Air.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having us here. At Elroy Air, we're building autonomous vertical takeoff and landing systems that can deliver about 300 pounds of cargo over a 300-mile range. Our core mission is to improve the quality of life around the world by democratizing access to rapid logistics. As we spend time with groups like the World Food Program and the World Bank, they oftentimes actually share with us that over 1 billion people live outside the reach of reliable roadways. Our thesis is that not only in the sense of disaster relief is rapid logistics important, but even when we start to look at the global logistics landscape, the Amazon effect is starting to put a lot of pressure on a number of shippers around the world. However, lagging infrastructure fundamentally isn't keeping up in order to scale with this type of demand. And so our thesis is that you need to build a modality that's decoupled from infrastructure altogether. And I narrated a video here to explain a little bit more.
It's more connected. Logistics has to adapt to keep up with demand. Today, more than 1 billion people live in communities outside the reach of reliable roadways. In other places, traffic congestion is continuing to grow at an alarming rate. At Elroy Air, we are working to solve these problems with autonomous flying cargo systems that don't depend on ground infrastructure. Introducing the Chaparral, a hybrid electric aircraft capable of carrying up to 300 pounds of cargo over 300 miles without the need for airports. The Chaparral's vertical takeoff and landing capabilities mean that every loading dock, every parking lot, and every flat surface is a potential delivery location. Our cargo containers are separate from the aircraft. Once a cargo container is packed, It is set outside for pickup. The chaparral taxis over the container, picks up the cargo, then takes off vertically. The vehicle transitions to wing-based flight and recharges its battery en route to its destination. When the chaparral lands at the destination, the system will deliver the container and pick up another for the return flight. We believe that extending the reach of express logistics can improve the quality of life around the world. This is a rare moment where technology can leapfrog today's infrastructure challenges. The chaparral can connect the dots between people, places, and goods in ways that were not possible before, delivering to warehouses, hospitals, and communities in need around the world.
Thank you very much. That's the power of VTOL. Fantastic. So, Alice Cummings from VrtyX. You're a logistics and business development professional with extensive financial services acumen in the private investment space. VrtyX was launched in Ohio in 2018 and is using smart mobility and drone services to solve logistics problems presented by organ and tissue transportation. And as we were emailing about the other day, so my fiance is in medical school. She's going to be graduating in a couple of months. And one of her classmates did a short rotation with assisting organ transplant donation and use for transplant services. And so he had an opportunity to take a private plane 2 directions to go visit another hospital and pick up an organ and bring it back to prepare it for transplant, which I think as a student was probably super fun and way better than studying for 24 or 36 hours, but also a tremendous waste of resources, I think, or there's a better way to do that. So.
Absolutely. And good morning, everybody. Thank you guys all for having VrtyX be part of the panel and for everything else that you guys are doing to put this event on. So for all the groups involved, it's certainly a lot of work, and I understand that. But for the VrtyX project, we incorporated in Ohio in 2018, and we're trying to solve a very complicated problem. It's medical logistics at its top line, but ultimately it's organ delivery and tissue delivery. So some of the most important cargo in the world that needs serious time sensitivity components and things that really don't exist right now are a national transportation system or a good custom, door-to-door style delivery service where you do see that in the world with other things like pizza delivery and Amazon package delivery. You don't see it in the world with organ delivery. And much to Brian's point, there are the average and the norm is to take a chartered jet flight if you need to, and it will transport a surgeon or transport even just a standalone packaged cargo, and it's just not really the best solution for it. It's expensive, it's clunky, it's hard to source, it's hard to find, and although I'm sure the surgeons I don't mean to poke at any surgeons, but I'm sure they like their travel experience because I'm sure it is top notch. It is a waste of their time and resources to have to spend hours going to a location to recover something and then hours coming back to then transplant something. So life-saving measures, that's what we're really working on. There are resources that we need, things like what Elroy Air just put up on the mark, which are extremely great innovation that we need in aviation and that we need in our world and aerospace to transport things smarter and better. But we also need what Ohio's bringing, which is, to Joe Zeiss's point, the proximity to have and connect major metropolitan areas like Columbus, like Cleveland, and then expand and scale that here in Ohio so that we can use that model, that corridor concept to repeat and move things across the country and create that national platform for organ transportation.
So moving along down our panel here, we have, we have a video first.
VrtyX is solving a need for people in the organ donation and organ transplant space. We have in the world a matching component for donor and recipient where someone needs obviously an organ in their world and it helps them at saving lives, but there's not a really efficient way to transport something across the country or the geography that's necessary. So if you think about the concept of driving on a highway and you have to get from point A to point B, in order to do what we want to do for autonomous package delivery, we have to take that highway up to the sky. If you have the ability to track your pizza location or your geography of your Amazon package, why can't the world see organs follow the same path. Minutes matter dramatically in a person's life, the amount of time that it takes to transport something, receive, analyze, and the physical transplant that has to happen at the end of the day for the life-saving opportunity. 20 people die every day in need of an organ transplant, and VrtyX introduces a faster, better, efficient way of getting it to them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to try to be a little briefer here so we can get to the interesting conversation. So, Jonathan Hartman, Disruptive Technologies Lead, Sikorsky. Go ahead.
I appreciate that, Brad. Thanks. And thanks, everybody, for being here. As I mentioned, my name's Jonathan Hartman. I work for Sikorsky Innovations, which is the advanced technology development arm of Sikorsky Aircraft. We are the leader in vertical lift solutions worldwide. For some of you who might be experiencing this for the first time, you might not have heard of Sikorsky. I know I hadn't. I grew up in Ohio, just outside of spitting distance from NASA Glen, and then promptly moved to the East Coast, but still love being back here. Sikorsky, you know us by our products, the Black Hawk helicopter on the defense side, the presidential helicopter, every president since Eisenhower has flown in one, and if you've had the unfortunate need to take the Cleveland Clinic's life flight aircraft, that is also one of our aircraft. So our mission is we pioneer flight solutions that bring people home everywhere, every time. As Disruptive Technologies Lead, I get a chance to look out into the future and think about trends that may impact our business. And urban air mobility, and we'll get into definitions of that, certainly is an interesting area for us. I think the reason that urban has stuck around for so long is that there is an emerging problem with our cities and our mega cities globally. Right? Kofi correctly pointed out there's 1 billion people living outside of traditional road infrastructure. The flip side of that is 2 to 3 million people per week are moving into cities around the globe. Think about that for a second. That's been happening for a few years, will happen for the next decade. Largest shift in humanity in our history. That's like a new New York City popping up somewhere every 6 to 8 weeks on the globe. So it's, can you take the relatively infrastructure independent need of vertical lift? In disaster relief, as Kofi was mentioning, when countries ask for aid, they'll ask for water, they'll ask for food. One of the first things they ask for is send helicopters, right? Because of our ability to access places that other traditional transportation can't. Can we use those similar benefits to solve some of these emerging transportation needs? Now, I'm not here to say that I have a super secret electric aircraft program in a hangar somewhere. What I will say is we are committed to vertical lift. There's a lot of folks who will say urban air mobility is a new mission. It's not. We have been moving people and goods through cities and regions since our inception. We are doing some substantial investment in enabling technologies. One of the things you're going to see here in a minute is our autonomy research aircraft called Sarah. It's a 12,000-pound S-76 aircraft. Any one of you in this room, I could take and train for 40 minutes in a simulator, put in the right seat of that aircraft, and you could conduct a full mission using a tablet to have the aircraft take you from takeoff to touchdown. And the reason I can say that with confidence is we've already done it with a few dozen people. That's progressing towards FAA certification right now. So what we're concerned about is how do you take some of the technologies you're seeing on the $40 drones that you can buy at office supply stores and make them reliable, safe, and robust at scale. Now, the video you're going to see here in a second is a vision for urban air mobility that we put together. It features a helicopter, not a future vehicle, because while vehicles are important, they are, in our estimation, one component of what the ecosystem needs to have happen. You're going to hear a lot about the need to make this system more seamless. In aviation, we have a general need to impose our will upon infrastructure, right? Airports are somewhere off in the distance behind fences, nice manicured runways. If I were to land a helicopter outside this hotel now, I promise you everybody would get up and go see it land because it's unique and different. How do we make it such that that is an everyday occurrence? How do we make that such that people feel safe and can access that in an inclusive way? So what you're going to see here, we actually went to Seoul to film this video because it is a global problem. And what you're going to see is a experience that would seem everyday, but that has safety and reliability woven throughout it invisible and seamless to the user. And for this video, we actually collaborated with Otis Elevators. We said, hey, we're both vertical lift companies. You guys stop at about 40 stories. We keep going from there. But it's important to remember that as we think about these solutions, we have to plan for the infrastructure we have today. That's why we have to talk about tailored solutions for regions, because we can't simply impose our will upon cities that have spent billions of dollars in infrastructure, regions that are still developing. But we also have to remember that the UN says that by 2050, if you look at all the buildings and cities and regions in the world, 1 out of every 2, 50%, haven't been built yet. So over the next 30 years, there's a transformational opportunity to introduce new multimodal mobility. So go ahead and show the video.
There are some moments you just can't miss. Our cities are growing, and getting to your destination isn't so simple. But what if there was another option? What if the journey was just as easy as choosing the destination? When you're in the business of moving people, you know a little bit about how to get to the places that move people. With a new experience that revolutionizes travel from the ground up. Tackling the urban mobility challenge requires innovators like Sikorsky, with nearly a century of experience in developing solutions for every mission, focused on expanding the capabilities of the helicopter through advances in speed, autonomy, and intelligence. Building on today's solutions, the future of urban mobility requires new thinking to create a seamless experience. We want to save you time getting there, so you can enjoy just being there.
Care to join me?
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. So, Edgar Valdez with UPS Flight Forward, you're also working on medical delivery, right? Tell us more about that.
Correct. I really want to bring attention to the fact that we want to continue to be a global logistics leader. And in doing so, we look at the advancements of unmanned aircraft systems as a new technology that can provide a new service to our customers. And we recently actually have made some announcements in regards to, well, really, we've recently entered the market. We incorporated last year as UPS Flight Forward, and we began some operations in North Carolina during the integration pilot program, as well as San Diego, also with the integration pilot program. This video will provide at least an understanding of what our current operations are in regards to being able to provide medical specimen delivery and how it's able to benefit our customers and really the patients for those hospital networks. It is not our intent to only really stick to this. We want to be able to develop this continually and possibly look at final mile delivery, longer range UAS, and therefore continue to be that global logistics leader. So.
Fantastic. And Fred Judson, last and certainly not least, tell us more about the Unmanned Aircraft Center here in the Ohio Department of Transportation.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And it is Judson, not Jetson, but as George might have alluded to in the beginning. So we are the Ohio UAS Center. We support autonomous aircraft technologies. We were formed originally as one of the test centers that we pivoted to support the new advances in aviation technology in the state of Ohio. We have several assets, and one of them that you'll see in the background right now is our SkyVision asset that sits at the Springfield-Beckley Municipal Airport. That is one asset that is unique to Ohio to do beyond line-of-sight aircraft testing of all sizes. So whether it's a small unmanned aircraft or it's a optionally piloted aircraft, remotely piloted aircraft, or even manned aircraft, we can provide deconfliction services to anybody who would wish to come to use that asset. The other things that we have to support the new aviation technologies, we formed Fly Ohio underneath Drive Ohio. Drive Ohio is underneath the Ohio Department of Transportation. We're focused on the future of mobility, and with the new vertical landing takeoff technologies and automation and aviation, we've identified this as a major new trend in transportation. So it's our job to make sure that we are ready for that future trend, and some of the things that you'll hear about all throughout this symposium will be talking about some of the efforts that Ohio has moving forward. One of the shining examples we have outside of SkyVision, we have our 33 Smart Mobility corridor, where we're doing unmanned aircraft traffic management that we know that it will also be scaled up for urban air mobility. That's being led by the Ohio State University. That's a $6.2 million project and was enrolled into the FAA's Partnerships for Safety program, so we're proud about that, and that was with the help of GE's Aeros. Another soon to be released is economic impact research for the state of Ohio, focusing on the I-71 corridor, and I think that was echoed a couple times through the panel. We see one of the initial stages of enabling this urban air mobility or regional air mobility would be along our I-71 corridor connecting Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. So that will be one of our first corridors that we're hoping to enable by 2021, at least in partial service, and then using that as a blueprint for the rest of the state. Another area that we're looking into promoting is the FAA's remote tower capabilities. FAA's initial thoughts on remote towers would be it's to mimic existing air traffic control. We see that scaling up those towers would also be able to handle some of the newer autonomous aircraft technologies and potentially offer additional advances to our small to medium-sized airport, which could provide additional economic benefits not before seen. But other than that, we are continuing to promote Ohio's legacy in aviation, trying to leverage our existing assets and infrastructure that we have, and trying to make sure that everybody knows that Ohio is ready to facilitate this new technology.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about this term, urban air mobility. Maybe George said earlier, I think, something along the lines of new uses of low altitude airspace, something like that. Does anybody want to try a crack at a definition or an alternative term, or does anybody want to? Because we heard a number of very different applications of this new technology. Kofi talking about accessing places that don't have infrastructure versus urban environments that have too much infrastructure, or challenges in accessing that infrastructure. So does anybody want to take a crack at a definition or a different term? Or?
I'll take one crack, and when you live in the aerospace and the defense world for a while, you get used to acronyms, right? So I think we have UAM, NASA's calling it advanced air mobility. I've heard now a new term. I would propose that instead of getting longer acronyms, we just shorten everything back up. It's aerial mobility, right? It's how do we access and expand use of the low altitude third dimension, and there's a number of use cases within that, but it's how do you utilize the fundamental nature of being able to go point to point without significant infrastructure, and what are the use cases within that?
Sounds pretty good to me. I like that. Maybe we could go back through a little bit and ask each of you to describe, talk short-term, long-term, right? So looking at the projects your companies are undertaking now and how they fit into what we can all expect to see here in Ohio and other regions in the short term and in the long term. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. On our side, I think we're grouping it into phases. And so phase one has to do with how do you connect communities that are hard to reach, rural areas, but then even also flying over water. And so we look at the places where the regulatory environment are going to be the friendliest and overlay that with where is the market ready for these type of use cases. We've seen that in a number of countries it's very challenging to be able to get basic supplies from one spot to the other. We've also seen in islands it becomes very difficult to have the level of flexibility that we're accustomed to in a number of urban environments. And so in our phase one is thinking about how can we service these communities, especially with the collaboration with the regulatory environments who would like us to be in lower population density in the earlier days. And the next phase is thinking about how do you start to fly over congested areas. As it was eloquently put earlier, the urban environment is starting to become one of the largest centers around the world. I think in a number of countries we're starting to see a lot of flight going directly into some of the urban centers, and we want to be able to be a part of that experience. As traffic continues to pick up, as groups continue to consolidate, we think that decoupling, or at least utilizing the sky to be able to be the next version of what we are considering some form of a highway for delivery, could be really exciting in phase two.
I'll take a next run at that. So for VrtyX, and I sit on this panel to try to bring you application of where this can go as much as possible, and especially in medical logistics, but in very defined sessions. So we have a short-term plan where we're trying to wait out what the answers are really going to become. We're not actually part of that decision process. We are involved, we are team members, but we are not the aviation subject matter experts that are defining. We're working in hand with the FAA and hand in hand with some of these very powerful companies to define that, but we have to work in the limits that we're given. And so our short-term plan is, can we introduce a plan with manned flight, and can we use ground teams to kind of draw out what I'm looking at for VrtyX as a reverse hub and spoke kind of model. So you have, where are the spokes going to be, where is the hubs going to be, and we have some of that defined and some of that in process for Ohio. And so I think a lot of that is going to, in the next, especially 2020, near future, start to be defined. And where are those waypoints going to be? Where can we actually move? The smart corridor is part of that. Then there's the I-71 corridor, and how will that connect? And so if you're at minimum connecting to Cleveland and to Columbus, that's a huge upside on the market right now. You've got really only next to that is maybe New York trying to connect Syracuse and Rome right now, but it's not the same caliber. It's a completely different level of caliber for cities and capabilities and for revenue generating models. We want to go where there can actually be repeat processes, just like the Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor is trying to instill. So our long-term outlook is going to be, where can we actually introduce drone transfer? Where can we actually move, drones into the equation? Our need for drones or for unmanned systems is at the 55 plus caliber, and so we hit that certain mark where we have to have that infrastructure. We're not working on something that can carry a 5-pound payload. It's not sufficient for what the services that we need. So we have to plan for the long-term plan of as those systems come to market, as we can work with those partners to bring those forward, where can we actually start testing those? Where can we start introducing legs, and where can those spokes actually start to take place and move into drone transportation? So that's kind of how we're looking at it. Still a phased concept, but short term is manned and ground fleet, and then we will replace that with drones over time.
So I'd say just real quick for us, we're part of the aerial mobility solution today. We will continue to be part of that aerial mobility solution going forward. what you're going to see from us is continual insertion of new technology to make those systems safer, more reliable, and more capable. Autonomy is certainly an example of that. While I gave the example that anybody in this room with 40 minutes could fly my aircraft, and that's absolutely true, what we see the potential for that technology to do is take some of the workload off of trained pilots that are flying into the dark, stormy night on the side of the road to take somebody that's critically injured to a hospital, and how do we make that mission safer? We're already starting that. We just announced a couple of weeks ago that we're collaborating with Ericsson to put our autonomy systems into their aerial firefighting aircraft to make that dangerous mission safer as well. So you're going to continue to see us roll out technologies that enhance the capability of vertical lift, continue to add safety, which in turn then allows that mission to become more expansive.
Great, thank you. So we're taking a pragmatic approach in regards to our expansion. So right now we have, as the video mentioned, operations in North Carolina, and we've announced University of California, San Diego, and also Utah. In addition, we've announced partnerships with CVS, Amerisource Bergen, and Henry Schein. Our approach is the same as everyone else in regards to what the regulators generally call the walk, crawl, run approach. And we're walk, maybe run. We'll get there. And the idea is that we identify the use cases for our customers. Our customers will determine what the push is, and the industry will help us be able to meet the demands for our customers. In regards to our long-term future use case, there's a reason that we've made some decisions in regards to our partnership with CVS. The ability to be able to provide drone delivery from a business to consumer, possibly either residential or maybe in an urban environment, as well as possibly even the testing that we did in 2016 with the Ohio company, actually, and we were able to provide some testing in regards to a UAS coming off of a package car, and the data that it was able to provide was good understanding as far as some of the barriers that we will face in regards to that. That will be a challenge, but it's a challenge that I think we here and everyone else is willing to take on, and our customers are asking for it. In regards and in addition to that, we announced that we had our standard standard Part 135 air carrier certificate. That allows us the ability to be able to have aircraft with the capability of up to 7,500 pounds of payload capacity. Therefore, get us an aircraft like out there and we'll fly it. We have customers and we have a demand, and we are willing to take that challenge and meet the demands of our customers.
Kofi, I think you've got customers on this panel. So Fred, hearing these visions, how ready is Ohio for implementation of what these fine folks are talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And since we are the Department of Transportation, that whole future of transportation is something that we are very concerned with. So we have to make sure that we're prepared for this. A few years ago, we started SkyVision. SkyVision was like our crawl piece. But it exists as an asset, an Ohio asset, to do research and development, to do beyond line of sight testing for aircraft of any size at the Springfield Airport. From there, we scaled up into unmanned aircraft traffic management, and that's our 33 Smart Mobility corridor led by OSU. And that's studying not only just how we manage that lower altitude airspace for things like urban air mobility or unmanned aircraft traffic management, but also that intersection between autonomous ground vehicles as well as air vehicles, which makes it one of the unique projects in the country. From there, we can build a blueprint and get a better idea of what kind of infrastructure. Being a part of the Department of Transportation, we do our infrastructure, and that's a main part of our jobs for transportation. So we feel it's our job then to make sure that we identify what that infrastructure is in working with the FAA to give that assurance that we're not going to crash on the ground and hurt people or collide in the sky with another aircraft. scaling up from the UTM project. We're moving into urban air mobility and regional air mobility, and we're looking at the installation of vertiports, the installation of advanced remote air traffic control towers, and then seeing how that will play out in the whole landscape. And as it was said before, the I-71 corridor is an important first step for Ohio as far as scaling that up and providing that as a service to companies like everyone that's on this panel. We've identified that corridor. Several industry members have echoed that corridor is very important, and it's important to the state of Ohio. And a lot of it with our economic research project that will be released just here really soon is going to study what kind of impact. So there's in the part of that research proposal, the winning proposal is supposed to reach out to all you guys and ask how important it is. So I hope you can respond to it. But that is Ohio's future, and we hope that like the I-71 corridor, at least in limited operation, will be there around 2021. We're hoping full operations by 2023.
So to open it up to the panel for a little more back and forth discussion here, one of the questions I've heard, well, let me back up. In the last couple of years, I think we've seen tremendous progress on the vehicles and on the technology side, and everyone in the aerospace industry has kind of gone, holy crap, this is real, and a lot faster than I think anyone anticipated 3 or 4 years ago. Some of the progress would be made. And so now more and more, I'm hearing questions like, what defines how exciting a particular locality or region or city is for an early use case of this technology or early business case? And I think there's some pretty obvious business metrics there, you know, how dense is the traffic if you're looking at passenger movement and that kind of thing. But hearing from Fred and from our other speakers, everything that's going on in Ohio, could we talk a little bit about what your answers to that question is? What really matters when you're looking at early places to deploy your technologies, and you hear what the government is up to? What matters? What are you looking for? What's most important?
I'll take a first stab at that. So we are your quintessential customer, right? We are a small business. We started a couple years ago. We're trying to move into the urban air mobility space, into the drone market. We're saying, okay, we created this software. We have a need. We have people that want to move things from point A to point B. How do you help us get there? So we came to Ohio. We incorporated in Ohio mainly because it brought so much to the table. And I would say, even though it may not look like it sometimes from a public perspective and maybe from an unknowing perspective, if you're not in this industry, Ohio is the place to be. And it's the place to be because of many reasons. You have the subject matter expertise here is, you know, next to none, second to none. You've got the Ohio UAS Center, their team, some of the infrastructure that they've already put in place, like SkyVision. You've got this vision of these remote towers that's going to pull together one central location where you know where your home base is going to be. You see and understand the vision of the FAA, the vision of Ohio for how are we going to do sense and avoid versus just see and avoid. You have to combine those two aspects in order to make any of this reality. And so when we say, okay, we're trying to pull together a vendor pool of all sorts of unique systems, how are we going to talk to all of those vehicles? How are we going to do this? We're doing mixed fleet, just like FAA is trying to understand. How are you going to do mixed fleet? So Ohio got that. And then they had this corridor concept. You're going to put together one of the largest corridors in the Midwest and connect 2 major cities. Why wouldn't we want to come here? Why wouldn't we want to be part of that? I mean, healthcare for Ohio is huge. So I would say from a VrtyX perspective, we had the revenue generating capabilities here. You have Cleveland Clinic, you've got, you know, Cincinnati is not left out either, but I'm calling out Cleveland and Columbus particularly because of OSU, because of Cleveland Clinic, because of some of these areas that we have the early adopters ready to go and wanting to have this technology. They want this transportation system. And so they're saying, what can you do to help us get us there? And we're saying, well, we're going to rely on Ohio and Ohio's administration because they're just as gung-ho as we are on this. And this pulls together a path that's repeatable, whereas many other states are not looking at things that are doing that. They're looking at first to market. They're looking at what can we do in a small geography, or what can we do in our open rural space. This is truly pulling together 2 major metropolitan areas, putting a corridor in place that's going to be available for test use. And then for us, we want, like I said, a reverse hub and spoke model. So we want to branch off of that. So what better place to be than that? So subject matter expertise, you've got the industry expertise, you've got quite a bit of DoD research going through here. We've got AFRL, we've got OFRN, we've got all sorts of aerospace and aeronautical innovation happening in Ohio. You've got so much history with it. And then on top of that, you've got a model to push it forward, and then cities that are actually going to allow us to make money doing that. I don't see anywhere else where we would even consider. So.
Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Absolutely. I think initiatives such as Sky Vision, or as earlier was mentioned, Drive Ohio, are important in regards to show the interest in regards to the state regulators and also the industry in regards to they're on board. They know that there's a challenge and it has to be met together. And by doing so, we'll be able to overcome some of those challenges, especially with such an emerging technology. And I think that's going to be a huge focus in regards to that, as far as some of the, I guess, reasons of how we have identified locations has been looking at the various test markets and also the various geography, altitude. You have to be able to test and prove to the regulators that the vehicle can operate within various factors. So that's been some of our decision-making process, and as well as some of the various technologies that we choose to test with.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add to what Alice was mentioning a little bit earlier. As a recap, for us is really this combination of where is the market opportunity and then where is the regulatory environment the most friendly. We start to think about that actually on a global scale because so many communities are actually in a challenging situation from not being able to get the supplies that they need on a daily basis. I think the way that Alice put it is spot on though. If there is a environment where it's no longer just about testing in a small area, considering that our aircraft can fly about 300 miles, but instead actually encompasses communities and cities where there is a large amount of density on one spot and a large amount of density on the other one for us to be able to create some sort of bridge between, that is the sweet spot for us. From a commercial side, it's groups like what Edgar and them are doing on the UPS side, where they're bringing together and consolidating demand from around not only the country but around the world. Pulling that all to the table for a group like us is really, I think, the right spot.
So I guess to tee up the discussion that we're going to have throughout the rest of the day, we have great panels on infrastructure and all the different elements of urban air mobility. What are some of the greatest challenges that you find yourselves facing in the next couple of years as we're working through testing and development of these technologies and towards implementation? If anybody wants to weigh in on that.
Sure. Sorry. I was going to say, I think it's some of the greatest challenges we face. When we think infrastructure, we think concrete pads and buildings and things of that nature. Infrastructure is both the digital as well as physical backbone of getting things done. And I think we need to, or we're going to have to, reinvent the traditional definitions of how aerial mobility solutions fit into a multimodal transportation system rather than being a nice but separate component that they are today. From the video I was showing, what we didn't show you was some thinking around the fact that the building and the elevator were actually making the decision for the person whether to take them down to the street to a ground transportation option or take them up to the roof for an aerial transportation option. Having the buildings making the decisions to help make that more seamless. You're seeing some cities as well as some rural areas rethink how they think about their existing and future infrastructure digitally and physically. On the city side, cities like LA that are thinking about how do you digitally manage curbside needs, what is infrastructure and how does infrastructure come into play in the various scenarios. Other areas, the World Economic Forum is thinking about what best practices look like globally for that sort of thing. But I think that the challenge is breaking through the traditional barriers of what infrastructure is and helping to redefine that as we think about all these use cases.
Absolutely, and I believe that as far as some of the barriers that we foresee, I'm confident that the technology and the regulations will get there. I have no doubt in my mind in regards to that. However, what we, I think, need to also focus on is public acceptance and public demand in regards to seeing a helicopter coming in right out here. It's that understanding. It's new. It must be met together with whether it be just road shows or being able to just express the importance of safety in regards to this aviation industry, and as far as it will, and its importance in regards to safety. I think that's going to be also a barrier that we'll have to also meet and face.
Yeah, I think what I would add is a combination of what Jonathan and also Alice were mentioning. So it's a sequence of infrastructure, but then also this opportunity to be able to go long distances. For us, we're prioritizing markets where there's relatively low population density in our phase one. So you think about islands where it's hard to get from one spot to the other. You think about environments where roads just aren't available as an option. But as we start to think about the next chapter of phase two, it's creating very well-defined outlines of metrics that groups like us are going to have to hit in order to be able to serve populations that are actually in densely populated areas. I think that's one of the challenges right there, is just this question mark around what exactly do we precisely need to do in order to be able to access those markets. A lot of our investors are asking that question, and we want to be able to have a good answer.
I would echo the same sentiments as the rest of the panel members. Is part of the Department of Transportation. Regulatory environment is very crucial to what we do, and of course I talked about infrastructure. Where does that infrastructure go? But one of the benefits we have is being under Drive Ohio, which is focused on autonomous ground vehicles. It's interesting to see that that they really parallel technologies. Just one has a Z component versus just on the ground. But we see we keep going back to the infrastructure piece as part of being the challenge. The ground vehicles have detection sensors that are placed alongside the road and communication issues, just like the air vehicles do as well. Just that whole Z component causes issues. But where does how often if you're going to use radar, how often do you place the radars, where the radars need to be, what kind of assurances the FAA going to need to make sure that we are able to deconflict the airspace. And that's really when it comes down to us as the Department of Transportation that we're concerned with. And then how does that actually, impact the state and local communities, and what kind of additional demands is that going to place on our forces as well? And that's something that we're looking at in the future and trying to overcome with this new technology.
And I'm going to add one comment, and it kind of echoes pretty much what everybody on the panel has said, because safety is so concerning. But from a business perspective, as an early adopter, you're often in this new space, and it's sort of undefined. And so we don't really know where the insurance market's going to go, where the standards markets are going to go. And we're building a team of, potentially transportation vendors that may be highly affected by that. We're certainly going to be affected by that, in the use case that we're bringing forward. And there's a lot changing, particularly in that space, and it really has to still be defined. And so what is that? Is it going to knock people out? Is it going to, open up a new avenue? Is it going to make a monopoly? All sorts of different things like that are concerning for us. And where are those insurance prices going to skyrocket? What's the shared liability going to look like? I mean, it kind of exists now, of course, but ultimately with something new, there's always speculation and ambiguity. So we'll see.
And just one go back on it, I think it's important to note one of the hurdles here is, what are we designing for? And let's make sure we don't miss anything along the way. So for instance, if I saw the program right, Rex Alexander, I think, is talking later today on infrastructure. Don't let that man off the stage until he tells you things like the fact that vertiports are currently designed with the fundamental assumption that all vehicles have one rotor on top and one tail rotor. And what does that mean when you start changing vehicle configurations? I tried to land a helicopter on a parking garage in LA about 3 months ago, and I ended up not being able to after 4 months of working with the city, because what I was trying to do fell into a weird regulatory gray zone between the building department, the Department of Transportation, and the fire department. Where are these blind spots that we have because we've set up infrastructure and needs with fundamental assumptions and barriers and silos? We got to make sure that we're not skipping over something like that that could end up having some pretty negative, significant consequences in the long term.
Not to mention the introduction of electric vehicles, which adds a whole nother layer to that.
Yes.
So after talking about problems introduced by unknowns, I'll throw an unknown at all of you and try to close with this. Would anyone be willing to take a stab at guessing or describing what your company will be doing in Ohio in 2023? 3 years from now, what is your presence going to look like in the state of Ohio? What are we going to see?
We'll be moving at minimum 256 transplants per day. 100%. That's what currently the run rate is per day in Ohio. We better be moving all of them, and I hope to be doing that.
100% market.
100%
Great.
market by 2023.
I'll add in, we're going to be continuing to provide the services we do today. For the unknown, I'm going to take the opportunity for the shameless plug, since there's so many students in the back, whether you want to work helicopters or fighter jets or the Orion spacecraft, LockheedMartinJobs.com. We certainly have a need for lots and lots of capable, talented folks to come join our team. But look, Ohio has been a central part of the aerospace community since its inception. I travel here a lot, whether it's for what was mentioned, Parker or Meggitt or NASA Glenn or AFRL. There's going to be a need for just a vast number of players in this ecosystem. If the low estimates are true, you are talking about a market that doubles or triples what the entirety of vertical lift aerospace looks like today. So I think there's a lot of potential here.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on in regards to the amount of exponential growth that's available, but I also want to throw in a plug in regards to our parent company and the relationship it has with Ohio. Actually, I just read an article yesterday that there were 65 Ohio drivers that were inducted into the Circle Hall of Fame, which is a honor in regard to a driver not having an accident for over 25 years, and it's a great honor for us to have those individuals on our team, and we continue to expand in Ohio, not just UPS Fly Forward, but UPS itself.
Fred, what do you hope to see in the state?
I'm going to end with, I think each of you just tell me what you need, and I'll see if I can make it happen. So I welcome everything here, so thank you.
Well, fantastic. Please join me in thanking our terrific panelists.